The long wooden jetty that has become such an icon in Busselton has undergone a number of changes in its long life and has, on a number of occasions, come very close to being lost forever. It has survived storms, vandalism, fires, government indifference, and even a cyclone that demolished a large section of the structure. The greatest supporters, and ultimately the saviours of the jetty, have been the ordinary people of Busselton, who have fought long and hard for the restoration and continued maintenance of the jetty. I've been to Busselton more times than I can remember, but it wasn't until 2021 that I finally went out to the end of the jetty to take a tour of the underwater observatory. But that's a little later in this video. First, let's have a look back at the history of this remarkable jetty. At 1,841 metres long, the Busselton Jetty is still the longest timber pile jetty in the southern hemisphere. The need for a jetty in Busselton dates back to the early years of the timber and agricultural industries, and is due mostly to the shallow nature of Geograph Bay. The water is a mere 8 metres deep at the end of the jetty, and most of the bay is unsuited to large cargo ships. The jetty was constructed to allow ships to load produce for export. The first jetty was completed in 1865, but was a mere 161 metres long. By 1875 this had increased to 292 metres, and many more additions followed up to the 1960s. As ships grew in size, it became more and more difficult to load cargo. The last commercial ship tied up to the jetty in 1971, and the following year the jetty was closed to commercial shipping. Maintenance of the jetty ceased, and it looked as though the government would decide to demolish the whole structure. In 1976, a Save Our Jetty group was formed and began raising money for restoration, but initial progress was quite slow. When Cyclone Alby struck in 1978, much of the first 700 metres of the jetty was destroyed. It looked as though the fate of the jetty was sealed. The old promenade section of the jetty was condemned and removed, and what had once been a Y-shaped structure now became the bent shape we see today. Beginning in 1989, a small fee was charged to enter the jetty, and money was put into a fund to help preserve the structure. To begin with, fees were collected at a small caravan located near the entrance of the jetty. 250 metres of the jetty had been replaced by 1990 after a $500,000 grant from the state government, and by using a further $160,000 in funds that had been raised. The first tourist train began operating in 1995, and this also boosted fundraising efforts. After raising $2 million, there was a setback when fire destroyed a 65-metre section of the jetty in 1999. The repair bill of $900,000 chewed up a large portion of the money that had been raised. Just 2 years later, the Interpretive Centre was opened, and efforts to raise money intensified. In the following 6 months, some $220,000 was raised, dwarfing all previous fundraising attempts. In the first year of operation of the centre, 200,000 people came to see the jetty. On the 13th of December 2003, the Underwater Observatory was opened, at a cost of $3.6 million. The hollow structure had been fabricated at the shipyards south of Fremantle, and was floated south to Busselton. It was then sunk, attached to the sea floor, and pumped dry. More storm damage occurred in 2004, but when the jetty was included in the State Register of Heritage Places, its future became more assured. $27.1 million, that included a government grant of $24 million, was spent on restoration. Work on the jetty meant that for a time the underwater observatory was only accessible by boat. On February the 6th, 2011, the jetty was reopened to the public, and a new tourist train began taking passengers out to the end of the jetty. The previous train had stopped running in 2005. Some rather large engines shunted goods out to waiting ships. The shunter shown here was working on the jetty in the 1960s. Sadly, there seem to be no pictures of the first tourist train, but the second was similar in many ways to the current model. The latest train began operating in 2017. It is solar powered, with panels located on top of each carriage. 5 lithium batteries give enough power to move 90 passengers along the 1.7 kilometre track. The train is the first of its kind in Australia and cost $400,000 to construct. It was made in Western Australia, which is great for local business. The jetty still faces many challenges, from wild weather to stupid, irresponsible people. In 2015, some submoronic muppets lit a fire near the end of the jetty after trespassing into a restricted area. Thankfully, on that occasion, the fire did not take hold and spread. An average of 400,000 visitors come to see the jetty each year, and the money they contribute for the train rides and entry to the underwater observatory goes a long way to ensuring the future of this amazing local icon.